Using this one hook has gotten me out of so many problems I have with React. It's like the perfect band-aid when constructing complex hook interactions, but I don't think you should use it. Here's why I use it every single day and feel terrible every time I do. The useUpdatingRef hook was one of the first I added to my React library LocalBoast, linked below, and it's one of the first things I've added to any new codebase I've joined in recent years. It's a really simple hook that simply takes any arbitrary value as an argument and returns a ref whose .current value contains that value passed in. The code for it is really simple. At the time of recording this anyway, it's literally just a useRef call and a useEffect call that updates that ref with the latest version of the value. This can be useful if you've ever needed to reference a changeable value inside of an effect or a callback, but where you don't want to add that value to your hook's dependencies array. For instance, if you've got a useCallback that sets a state value to the value provided in the callback, simple. You don't need any dependencies there. But what if you want to avoid calling setState if the new value is the same as the previous? Well, you can just compare them. But now you're either using a stale state value or you need to add it as a dependency. Fine, just add it. But now your callback gets a new definition every time the state value changes. It's not a huge problem, but it kind of defeats the point of memoizing it all. And when I'm writing library components, I try to make callbacks especially have fixed references, so as to not interfere with memoization in other places down the line. So to get a reference to our state inside of our callback without adding it to our dependencies, we can just store it in a ref, allowing us to read it in that way. But useRef calls only consider the value you pass it on the first render. It's the initial value and doesn't automatically update. To get it to update every time the value changes, you need to use a useEffect that updates it. And that's all the useUpdatingRef hook does. It just wraps this repeated sequence of two hook calls into a single hook call. And this isn't even my invention. It's actually something I saw in some old React docs, which I've linked below. And so if it's easy to use, gets you out of a lot of issues, doesn't have much of a performance impact, and is suggested in the React documentation, then why don't I recommend using it? Well, that's the thing. It's in the React docs, but they don't suggest using it. In fact, the words they use are "as a last resort," and only do this if you couldn't find a better alternative. So it's sort of a grey area of being a perfectly valid use of React, but also being discouraged. In fairness, the warning they give is that using mutations makes components less predictable. And that's a fair point. If I were teaching someone how to write a component to render some nice stuff on the screen and maybe do a little state manipulation, I would not touch useUpdatingRef. It's too funky, and there's almost definitely a better solution. And for most components written, it really doesn't matter if there's an extra render here and there, with state being set to the existing value or an effect running because a value was in the dependencies array, only to be met by an early exit. But with the work I'm doing on my library, it usually involves having an API that I want to satisfy for end users who don't need to know how the library was written. For instance, if you saw me mention that the LocalBoast library has a hook called useWipe that allows any app to have this scene changing animation play when you take some arbitrary action like switch color scheme, linked below, and you go and install LocalBoast from npm and you add this line of code to your app, you get a reference to the wipe function by calling useWipe. Now you could do something like pass that function onto another component in your app, and that all seems fair, right? Now what if you wanted to memoize the component? Why not? You could save some performance if the component has a hefty render cycle. Why would you be expected to know that the wipe function relies on knowing the current state of the app and options passed into the hook, and so might, without you knowing, get a new reference on some renders, killing your memoization? I don't think you should be expected to know that. I think it's a function with a fixed purpose, callable at any time, and so it should be a fixed reference that you can pass around without worry of it updating. And that's why the wipe function returned from useWipe doesn't have any dependencies, because I enclose every bit of outside data in a call to useRef or useUpdatingRef. In fact, I was building this hook live on stream, and one of my viewers, who was learning about refs from me, suggested something that I had never seen done before. See, usually if I needed a function with a fixed reference, I'd just make it a useCallback, and I'd have all the data it needs be referenced from a ref. But he suggested that the actual function definition could itself be passed to a useUpdatingRef call, meaning we could reference whatever we like in there and always be able to call ref.current inside any hook. And that gets extra gross since you then have to call the function through .current, So I definitely wouldn't expose that in anything returned from my library, but I probably will continue using that hack internally. Basically, all of this stuff with refs, it increases the complexity of the hooks or the components that actually use them, but they can lead to a cleaner, more consistent API for someone using the things exported from the library. So yeah, that's why I use useUpdatingRef and why it's included in my LocalBoast library, but why I think you probably shouldn't, and also why React thinks you probably shouldn't. Thanks for watching. Consider liking this video if you thought it was interesting, and if you want to support me in my efforts, consider subscribing or check out the description for links to the LocalBoast library, our Discord, or ways to support me financially. But either way, just remember to keep making the web more interesting with everything you build, and don't be afraid to boast about it.